My mind swirled with the dark water that carried us deep into the unknown. Thoughts and memories of Daniel clawed their way to the surface while rational panic held them under. He was gone, but right now the others weren't, and we were currently barreling down a concrete flight of steps and being violently tossed around in the process. I focused on keeping myself balanced in the water, but it was useless. The currents dragged me down against the steps like a wet rag against a washboard, then slammed me into the walls at every turn. I struggled between surfacing to find Ethan and Bear ahead of me, but my eyes stung from the dirty, frothy murk, and my thoughts were about as steady as the crashing rapids. Dan was gone. After what felt like an eternity of being threshed about, I felt myself go into a freefall before breaking the surface of the pool. The rushing water was muffled by the unmoving lake. I stayed still for a moment, not only because of the aching in my body, but because I didn't know what else to do. Surface or remain under. The outcome was all the same. We were in over our heads, and it was my fault. At least if I drowned down here, I wouldn't be around to see any more of my friends die. Swim up, I snapped at myself. Daniel died because of you, and you're not going to throw that away. I obeyed and broke the surface, taking in a deep breath of air. I had forgotten how good the feeling was. Around me, a subway station lit with flickering lights that was rapidly filling with water. The whole area was already halfway submerged, and ahead I could see Bear and Ethan supporting each other as they crawled out of the water into a seat of steps. Strained and tired, I began to paddle my way over as well. When I reached the stairs, Ethan turned and gave me 2 looks. One was of relief that I was okay, and the other was the realization he had seen behind the thin sheet of ice. Slowly he folded into himself and leaned against the wall before sliding to the floor and burying his face into his knees. I felt like doing the same. I attempted to speak, but no matter how hard I tried to conjure up the words of reassurance, none would come out. Bear circumvented this problem with denial.
Are you guys okay? She said. Where's Dan? He was right behind you, right?
She asked the question before we even had the chance to answer the first one. Hopping up, she sloshed her way down into the water, hardly noticing that it was up to her waist. She fixed her eyes on the maintenance door above the tracks that water was currently gushing from and said nothing else. I forced myself to stand and stepped into the pool with her. Bear.
We have to save Dan,
she said plainly. Bear. Dan's not. The rest of the sentence hooked at my throat like nettle being torn from a thicket. He's not coming.
What do you mean? He was right behind you.
Her voice shook as the flood crawled its way up her waist.
He'll be here. He'll be here any second.
I didn't follow up with anything. Just slowly waded next to her and gently grabbed her arm.
He's going to...
She didn't get to finish before her voice broke along with her tears. She held back choked sobs and turned to me, pounding hard against my chest.
Why did you let him go? Why did you let him go, Joe?
It was a question I wondered myself. In the moment it all seemed so clear, but now I didn't know what to think. Bear laid into me a few more times before stumbling from the water and collapsing into my arms. Her grief was muffled by the wet cloth of my jacket. Ethan continued not to move. Only keep his head down and hide from the world. I stood there, numb and lost for a few minutes before the feeling of my stomach being submerged jolted me back to the reality of the situation. I didn't want to keep going. I wished that we had never left in the first place, but there was no way back now, and we had come this far. We needed to find the exit, and Dan believed that we could. Get him home safe, okay? Without a word, I gently guided Bear up the steps. As we sloshed out of the water, Ethan lifted his head. His eyes were tear-stained and vacant. I held out a hand to him and helped him up. Come on, I mumbled. We have to keep moving. $6,248. That's how many dots are on the ceiling, at least to the best of my count. It was hard to make out the details in the dim light of dusk. On top of that, every now and then, Mark would burst into a fit of coughs, and my concern from the pained sound of them would overwhelm my desire to count dots. After that, I would have to start over. Not that it bothered me, though. I had to keep myself occupied somehow. You never realize how long nights really are until you don't sleep through them. They feel like an eternity. I thought that I might be able to sleep without Andy by my side, at least over time. But it was proving to be the opposite. As the weeks passed, I found myself laying awake longer and longer. It was like my brain was rejecting the idea that I could ever get used to not having her there. Like it was punishing me for what I had done. It wasn't the first time I had felt this. It was the same back in Arkansas. After everything that had happened with Rose, back then, I had tried the old trick of counting sheep. It never helped. Now I count dots. It never helped either, but at least it passed the time. I began again. 1, 2, 3, 4. After a while, I made a game of it. I never used any tricks to calculate dots per tile, times the number of panels in the room, and I never counted by 3s or 5s. I decided I had to count one by one until I got my answer. I figured if I ever got the same number multiple times, I would know that it was finally right. Then I would be done. 188, 189, 190, 191. Of course, I always hoped that the numbers never matched. If I got the answer, there would be no reason to count anymore. What would I do all night and day? I hardly left the bedroom anymore. Even when everyone got up, I still came out to eat, of course. Jan made sure of that. Ethan or Bear would come in and visit me every now and then, and Daniel would check in too. They usually didn't stick around for long. I wasn't much for conversation, and I think they knew I wanted to be alone. Mark was often the only one in the room with me. The wound on his neck had gotten much worse, and the skin around it was bruised and yellow. He wasn't exactly in any shape to get up and interact with people, so he mainly lay in bed while Jan and Benjamin took turns caring for him. However, there wasn't much we could do to help physically without medicine and antibiotics. Just comfort him and hope that the festering gash would slowly heal on its own. I think we all knew it was more severe than that, however. 2,304, 2,305, 2,306. I admit, it was nice having Mark with me, even though we didn't exchange words with each other at all. There's something special about just being with someone. No conversation, no communication of any sort, just simply feeling their presence. I think even if he could talk to me without pain, he would have refrained. He understood that feeling as well as Andy did. I think that's why whenever he coughed, he'd try to muffle it. Mark didn't want to disturb the moment. I often told him he didn't have to. I knew it was causing him a lot of pain. He insisted, however. He said he knew I was sick of hearing it. I wasn't, though. Like I said, it threw off my count, and I was always grateful. Who knows how many times he stopped me from getting it right. 5,796, 5,797, 5,798. I did my best to keep a happy face despite the obviousness of my mental state. Any time someone would come to talk to me, I would engage with them and be attentive. Deep down, though, I was hoping they'd leave so I could keep counting dots. Ethan came to check on me often, but was never direct about it. He knew there was no point in asking how I was doing because everyone already knew the answer. Instead, he would just sit with me and tell me about what had been happening that day. We all played poker earlier. Frank won most, obviously. No one can ever read that guy. Yeah. Jan may be getting sick. She told Bear that she threw up this morning, so keep your distance there. I know she likes to hug. Is she okay? Yeah, she's fine otherwise. Doesn't look like she's running a fever at all. Bear thinks it may have something to do with something she ate. It could be. Wouldn't be the first time. Speaking of Bear, you should talk to her soon. Ethan began to fidget with his hands and looked at the floor as he continued. She says she misses seeing you. I see her every day. Yeah, but I mean, when's the last time you two talked? Not too long ago. She was in here the other day, but it didn't seem like she wanted to talk. That's because she don't know what to say to you. She knows you're hurting. I'm fine, Ethan. Are you? 6,001, 6,002, 6,003. Joel. Huh? Ethan sighed. never mind. I'm sorry, I'm just... I'll come out soon, okay? You don't have to. No, I want to. Okay? There was a long pause before he continued. What happened wasn't on you. You know that, right? Mark shifted across the room, sensing the shift in tension. Ethan, I'm fine. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone. Before he left the room, he turned back to me. We're all going to have a gathering and talk tomorrow night if you want to join. Don't feel like you have to, though. I wish I had stopped him and told him I was sorry. That I knew I was being a jerk. There's a specific window to apologize to someone, and when you don't do it for long enough, it stains into the relationship. Always silently there in everyone's memories after. For those months after Andy died, I wasn't much of anything to anyone. And I got a lot of my relationships dirty. The sad part was I didn't really care. It wasn't what I wanted to happen. I just wanted to count dots. 6,245, 6,246, 6,247, 6,428, 6,248. Huh? It wasn't the most beautiful place, and it would be pretty dangerous of a spot to risk setting up in. Then again, I could describe the hills above the same way. And that's where we usually made our graves. Besides, Dan deserved the best we could find, and we all felt confident that this would be it. The floor we found ourselves on was a mole, old and still, its neon and fluorescent lights only functioning in a select few places. We travelled through the area, saying nothing to one another until Bear finally spotted something down the corridor.
Over there.
As soon as we saw what she was referring to, Ethan and I agreed. We shuffled down the pink neon-lit corridor until we reached the opening. It was a large room that rose several balconies up with hardly any working lights, save for a few colourful tubes lighting the edges. The corners of the place were dark, but right in the centre before us, a single spotlight shined down from the ceiling, several stories above us, into a planter displaying in the middle. The fake plastic plants within were covered in dust and mold, but their colour still broke through and they looked real enough from a distance. The main focus, however, was the giant tree in the centre. It too was fake, but the amount of detail could have fooled anyone. It really wasn't important how it looked, and we knew that. The likelihood of anyone else finding this exact spot beneath the labyrinth of the house in a place where only a handful of people had ever been was astronomical. But still, Dan lost his life in an awful place. The least we could do is lay him to rest somewhere nice. Ethan and I did our best to clean off the plants nearby. The mold was thick and heavy, and Bear set to work etching off a smooth part of the tree. When she was finished, I handed her a marker, one we had been using to mark safe houses, and she removed the cap. She thought for a moment before leaning forward and writing slowly and neatly. For Daniel Kestner, he gave his life so that many more could be saved. May you finally find peace outside of this place. We stood back and stared, reading the words over and over again. However, no matter how many times we did, it never felt right. There was too much to say about the man that just couldn't be told in a few sentences on a grave. That he had been a fantastic pillar of hope for all of us through this whole thing. That he was beyond courageous. That he always looked out for every single one of us, above and below. Even reciting all the things Dan was in my head didn't come close to how much should have been said. When you lose someone you love, nothing ever feels like enough anymore. Only they were enough. But now they're gone. I wanted to say all of this out loud when the time came for us to speak, but I didn't have to. Every single one of us already knew. Instead, all I could manage was, I'm so thankful to have known. I hope you. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. Ethan nodded and started to say something, but the words fizzled out as he wiped tears from his eyes and slipped his hands into his pockets. You know, Bear whispered softly after a few minutes, when I was really young, my dad died. I hardly even knew him. Apparently there was an accident on the job site where he worked. I guess that's not really important. Point is, I never really knew him. But I knew that I should have been sad. I mean, my mom was for sure, but like I said, I never really knew him, so how could I be? She paused again for a moment as Ethan and I waited for her to continue. My mom remarried after a few years once I was older, and my stepdad was a pretty horrible guy. He was abusive to my mom, my sister, and me, but, well, none of that is really important either. The point is, I never really had a father in my life. I was only sad that I didn't have one after knowing what a bad one looked like. It was this really sucky feeling of knowing that what I had was horribly wrong, and yet I didn't even know what it actually was supposed to be like. After a while, though, I just kind of accepted it. Figured that I wasn't missing out on much. But then I met you. In the worst place of my life, I met you. When I needed someone the most, you were here. Bear looked up with tear-filled eyes and took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from breaking. And you know,
it wasn't until just now that I realized you were the thing that I was looking for. Someone who looked out for me, who protected me, who was always there to talk when I had no idea what to do. You were the person I was so sad I didn't have in my life, and now you're... She let slip a handful of sobs before trying to push onward. I never really knew my real dad. And I never really got to grieve him. But I'm so grateful that I could say I had someone in my life who gave me an idea of what it should feel like. We waited there for a long time, staring at the memorial. None of us wanted to leave as soon as we did. We knew we would probably never see this place again. This was all we had left of Daniel other than our memories. And the worst part about those is that they often fade. We waited for hours. We waited until my watch chimed morning and waited until my watch chimed night. We waited until the sharp tink-plink echoed down the mall corridors. And we couldn't wait any longer. In silence, we scooped up our belongings and took off down the dark tunnel, barely even bothering to run. We would run if we knew it was after us. For now, though, we didn't care. For now, nothing really mattered. Kia ora whanau, Grimm here. Thank y'all for coming along on this intense story that we have been following along for the last few months. This is part 1 of chapter 15, or 15.1 as I like to write it. The reason I've done this is because the total recording for this was over an hour in length, and I thought maybe just so you guys can, get into it and not spend too much time listening to me, just shortening it down for this one might be good. The next one, if it's an hour long, I'll keep it in an hour long process, but I just thought breaking this down may make it more digestible. Let me know down below if you agree. I know I'll probably only get maybe 10 or 15 people viewing this, so if you make it to the end, just let me know, yeah? Give me some tips and tricks and things that you'd like to hear. Now, I'm not going to drag this out because it takes me forever to come up with truth. So I will just really run into a couple of things. Firstly, I'm planning to make some more changes to my channel. Now, what that means, I'm contemplating between starting a whole new channel where I focus primarily on where I want to be taking it, or if I'm going to be giving this channel a little bit more variety. I'm thinking whilst I do like the horror genre and I really want to keep that as my primary focus, I'm also thinking I may add a couple of other things in there, maybe a couple more voices of people, doing some reading for me, just to give this a little bit more life and expand on the ability of uploading, because let's be fair, uploading once a month or once a fortnight isn't overly the best for my algorithm or for your guys listening. So I'm working on these things. Trust me, something will change. It's just a lot of work. Also, I'm doing this from pocket. I don't make any sort of income from the channel, obviously, so I will be putting as much effort as I can and what I can afford where it can be put. Outside of that, though, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm going to have it up. I probably won't have any images throughout the video. I may just put one of, something that can kind of just be a background, mainly because I'm trying to avoid using AI too much, and unfortunately the only way I could make the images at this point, because of my low budget, was that way. So I'm going to create something. I'm going to put it as a background for my videos until I can afford to do a bit more. But hey, I've gone a bit too far. I've given you a bit too much information. I apologize for that. I'm on my way out. You guys, wherever you are, remember, be safe wherever you are. Have an amazing night or day. And as always, I'm Grimm, and I'm, well, signing off.